Well, good afternoon. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So if you can all please take your seats. My name is Owen Faris, and I direct the Clinical Trials Program in CDRH. And I'm really excited today to be moderating this session, which is titled the NEST Coordinating Center Launching the Data Network. And really what we're going to focus on today is what Rachel Florence dubbed as the most exciting part of what's happening in NEST right now, which is the test cases that have been ongoing and really just getting off the ground. And I have three esteemed panelists with me today. Lesley Curtis is the chair and professor of Department of Population Health at Duke University School of Medicine. Joe Drozda is Director of Outcomes Research at Mercy Health, and Paul Coplan is VP and Global Head of Medical Devices and Epidemiology at Johnson & Johnson. And I want to give a particular thank you to both Lesley and Joe because they've had travel challenges all day today, and actually both of them just arrived in the past 30 minutes or so. So all to be here for this discussion today, so thank you to both of them. So I'm going to go through just a couple of slides that I borrowed from Rachel, who showed these to you this morning. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. This is really sort of the summary slide of what the NEST Coordinating Center has been doing and what the plan is going forward. And just to highlight the fact that a lot has really happened in the last year. And so you can think of it as we really got off the ground about a year ago. And as everyone has talked about thus far today, there's really just been an enormous amount of activity from then until now. So here is the timeline for 2018 and the goals that are being worked on right now. And I want to draw a little bit of attention to an activity that just had some very recent activity, which is establishment of the Data Quality and Methods working group. So both of those groups had a face-to-face kickoff meeting about 2 weeks ago. It was the first time everybody got in a room together to talk about what those committees will be doing. Lesley Curtis is here and is the chair of one of those committees, and we'll be talking about that role. But really exciting, very short timeline to get some really impactful work done, and looking forward to that discussion about those roles there. So again, you saw this earlier today, Rachel Florence showed us, but this is a snapshot of the network collaborators. And as we talked about earlier today, there's really a broad reach in the number of patients and the number of hospitals that these collaborators are involved in. And so right now we're going to spend the rest of our talk talking about the test cases, and for the present what we're talking about is two phases of those test cases. So round one has already gone out. This is the timeline, and the box around the August-September 2018 shows where we are today. So in January, there was a call for submissions. Those submissions came in April through May, there was a discussion and analysis of those submissions to see which ones could be feasible, which ones could NEST Coordinating Center really help get off the ground, which ones might the NEST Coordinating Center be able to impact. June and July was proposal development, and now we are in the final stage of really getting those proposals finalized and getting them off the ground. And really the idea here is to test the feasibility of what the NEST Coordinating Center can do to support real-world evidence projects. And so these proposals are, challenges to the Coordinating Center. I have a question, I have a problem. Can NEST Coordinating Center and can real-world evidence help me solve it? And we expect to learn a great deal from these projects. Round two is just getting off the ground now. There was a call that went out for submissions in round two, and here is the outline of where we will be over the next several months, looking at new rounds of new potential test cases that we will consider in the second round. And so here is just a snapshot, Rachel showed this earlier, of the different projects that are in the first round. And as you can see, they touch a number of different device areas and also both PMA and 510K. And so now we're going to move forward and talk we're going to hear from each of our panelists and their particular involvement in elements of getting these test cases off the ground, and we're going to have a discussion about what their role will be going forward.
Great, thank you, Owen. And it really is a pleasure to be here today. And just to orient you, I'll be wearing two hats. they won't be distinguishable from there, so I'll tell you what they are. The first is as chair of the NEST Data Quality Subcommittee, and I'll tell you a little bit about our approach to data quality, which I'm really quite excited about. And then I'll also put on my Duke Health hat and talk a little bit about our experience as a network collaborator and why we as an institution and I am so excited about the opportunity to partner around test cases. But first, my data quality subcommittee hat. So, from the beginning, NEST has been very clear about the importance of data quality as this initiative moves along, and with that in mind, really tasked me as chair of this subcommittee and the group of subcommittee members with a charter, coming up with a charter that addresses this important issue of data quality and begins to lay the foundation for how we will continuously improve that data quality. And I've just, on my slide here, in 3 bullets, highlighted key elements of our charter. And the first is to develop a real framework around data quality that establishes that foundation. And the framework, we're very intentional about calling it a framework and not a standard or a set of standards, because what we recognize is that data quality and our approach to data quality has to continue to evolve over time. So I'll talk a little bit more about some guiding principles for that, but I just want to call out our intentionality in the use of the word framework. The second piece of our charter really is to make sure that we develop a process by which all of the collaborators can actually show how they are achieving the data quality that's set up by that framework. There are many collaborators, we've seen that on the previous slide, and making sure that everyone has a way to demonstrate to NEST and to the partners exactly how they're addressing key elements of data quality. We understand that will be critical. And then finally, make sure that we as a group are available to support the NEST Coordinating Center as questions arrive about with respect to data quality. We're a pragmatic subcommittee and recognize that there have been a lot of really important initiatives focused on improving the quality of real-world data. And so we're committed to building on those existing contributions. In our first face-to-face meeting just a couple of weeks ago, we identified several initiatives, several guidances that really can become foundational to our framework, recognizing that we have to cover both electronic health record data and registries, where I think a lot of work has been done. So we certainly are excited to leverage that. And provide collaborators with a way to progress along that framework. Health systems and collaborators are in different, I would say, stages of maturity with respect to the way that they gather and curate electronic health record data for use as a research asset, making sure that we provide clear guidance about how to move forward given where those health systems are in that at their level of maturity will be important. And importantly, with an eye toward that pragmatism, make sure that what we do is completely aligned with the test cases and that the first version addresses those. I'm personally a big believer in making sure that the work that we do is applicable to something as quickly as possible, because through that we'll be able to iterate toward better and better solutions. So this is just giving you a sense at least of how the Data Quality Subcommittee is approaching its task, and I hope giving you some confidence that data quality really is a critical aspect that the NEST Coordinating Center is taking very seriously. So now I'll take off that hat and put on my hat as a Duke Health representative and say that the test cases and the opportunity to be a network collaborator in NEST really is very exciting for us for a couple of reasons. Within our health system, and certainly many others, there have been efforts along the way to improve our capture of device-related data. And that happens in a variety of ways. At Duke, some of that has actually been led very directly on the purchasing side. What we've not always done as consistently is figured out how to flex that data muscle, if you will, in the research or in the evidence generation space. So already with the 2 test cases that Duke is involved in, we've had that real opportunity to dive in and begin to connect the dots between rich data that exist and important questions that we need to answer. So from our perspective, as I said, it's really been a terrific opportunity, and there's deep commitment within the institution to continue to flex that data muscle, if you will, and make sure that we're bringing the work that we do around data and data curation to bear in the evidence generation space. So maybe with that, I will turn it back to you.
I think you can just pass it right on to Joe.
Excellent.
Thank you. And so I'm Director of Outcomes Research at Mercy Health. So what's Mercy Health? I think I need to introduce you to us before I can go much further. Mercy is actually a Catholic regional health system that's in the center of the country, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas. We're pretty good size, now up to over 40 hospitals and over $5 billion in revenue. But importantly, about 13 years ago now, Mercy implemented the EPIC electronic health record and made the decision at that time to implement it in each one of our hospitals and each one of our medical practices. So we have the same EPIC health record everywhere. And we're big enough that we actually had to have 3 separate instances installed so that we could actually manage that. But it gives us a rich data set coming from both inpatient and outpatient care. And about, I guess it was about 8-9 years ago now, that Mercy established a health services research function to start looking at the use of the electronic health record data in informing the care of individual patients and of populations of patients at Mercy. And that's where I came in. So I think the important point to be made is that we've been working with the electronic health record now for 13 years and have done a lot to refine it over time in terms of inputs and also curating the data so that it is useful to individual practitioners and also useful in research. I can't say we're typical in that regard of hospitals and health systems around the country, but others are doing similar work. As a matter of fact, that's important because we're actually looking to network with those health systems, as I think we'll get into here. So now let's just follow the kind of the progression of how we've gotten into this medical device work, and it really started from wanting to know what was best for our patients. And we got started very early on with a demonstration where we implemented UDI, unique device identifiers, in our electronic health record and other systems so that we could integrate both UDI-associated device data with clinical data, and the key to that was capturing UDI at the point of care and then moving the data on the individual patients into a robust data set that would allow us to follow patients over time to see how they did. So these are the kind of the key components that are on the slide right now, but that's essentially what we've done, and we have been working at assessing the validity of the data we've collected that way, and also identifying obstacles to incorporating UDI into robust data sets along with electronic health record information. So one of the 2 things we learned out of that, one is that you have to dive in and do stuff in order to figure this out. We could have sat back and been thinking about doing these things forever and never really done anything about it. We just dove in. We didn't know it was going to be difficult doing UDI and the electronic health record system. By the time we found out it was difficult, we were committed, and we had to continue the project, and we're able to successfully complete it. The second major learning was collaboration. we did this initial demonstration collaborating with a number of health systems, Geisinger, Intermountain, Mayo, Kaiser, all helped us into the design of this, even though it was done entirely within Mercy. We also collaborated with FDA and with the manufacturers. We did it with coronary stents, so all three manufacturers of coronary stents helped us with that. So we learned the value of collaboration. And then we went on to the next step, and that was actually a collaboration with two of these health systems, Geisinger and Intermountain, to essentially do the same thing we did in our first demonstration project, and then to put together a distributed data network of the data sets created each one of these systems. So we did it initially, to further the MD-EpiNet goal of helping FDA in strengthening medical device post-market surveillance, but that sort of evolved over time, and our longer-term view of this is that we're really helping create NEST and supporting the NEST Coordinating Center by bringing to NEST the electronic health record data and device data captured at the point of care. So we see this as a major objective for build. Now along comes the NEST Coordinating Center, and we have an opportunity to work with another manufacturer in one of the first NEST pilot projects that we actually had going before the Coordinating Center came into being. And that actually grew out of our initial work, and we attracted the attention of the manufacturer, and we've done some deep dives into our electronic health record data. And we find that there's really a synergy here as we learn from our industry partners things about methods, et cetera, and we also bring contextualization of our electronic health record data, and which I think that's a very powerful combination to really begin to gain insights out of the data that we're getting. So, and we're now looking at the opportunity to extend that project to the rest of the build network, and we're also working with at least one other manufacturer on similar projects and looking maybe to expand beyond that. Now comes the opportunity to be a collaborating partner with NEST, and of course, learning the importance of collaboration, we jumped on that and became a collaborating network. And we see it as an opportunity to extend our work rapidly and to learn from the data quality efforts that you've just heard about and from the NEST Methods Subcommittee to be able to generalize our work rapidly. And so we jumped on that opportunity right away, and then the test cases came along, and here we had another opportunity to work with an industry partner, and we have submitted an industry-generated proposal to NEST Coordinating Center for the first round of test cases, and we're getting the opportunity here to partner with Mayo and Yale, two reasonably good systems. I don't know. I think they've done some fair work in the past. And so we're really excited about it, and it brings us back to the original purpose we got into this. It's helping us in the creation of some robust data sets at Mercy to help us in managing populations that goes beyond just the medical device work.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks to the organizers for the opportunity to share some of our experiences. My name is Paul Coplan. I'm the Vice President of Medical Device Epidemiology at Johnson & Johnson. And wanted to kind of present the industry researcher perspective of NEST. Just as a disclaimer, I think my opinions express those of my team and myself, but I can't speak for the whole of Johnson & Johnson or for the medical device industry as a whole. So what is the value of NEST, the test cases to industry? Well, one advantage is the coordination of the company-inspired research. And I say company-inspired research because the companies have to, at least in the first set of test cases, the companies had to submit a 2-page concept sheet of an idea for research. And then we could coordinate that with academic institutions that are in the NESTcc network collaborators. That led to a selection of the top-of-the-line prestigious research partners Yale, Mayo, but also to collaborate with Joe and Lesley on projects. That we would be difficult for industry to get to work with such good researchers ordinarily. There was also seed funding through from the FDA that always helps to get approval to do the work. Importantly, there's FDA engagement, so that this is something that's not seen to be outside of the FDA or could jeopardize other ongoing activities with the FDA, such as if there's a pre-submission going on, it doesn't inhibit us doing this kind of work. It gives us a bit of an opportunity to work more collaboratively with FDA. And I think most excitingly is the exploration of innovation in real-world studies. So there's a lot of ideas. We sense there's a lot of opportunities. We hear Dr. Shuren and Dr. Faris talk, and we sense there's a lot of opportunities, but how do we translate those into practical, pragmatic steps that we can start take that really benefit patients and move innovation along? And so that's where the NEST test cases have really been a innovation motivation for us, which is it was interesting to hear Dr. Gottlieb talking today, because that's what he was looking for in terms of regulatory science really spurring innovation. So what are the areas of innovation that we are looking at? So pre-approval, clinical study comparator arms or objective performance criteria. Patient-generated health data, we just heard a lot about that in the last session. That could be pre-approval for regulators or post-approval for payers. Label extension studies, proactive post-marketing surveillance, very important, also for the EU MDR regulations, but also for the FDA. And evidence to support value for payers. We heard Dr. Shuren talking about how important it is for that fourth hurdle of getting the payer approval. And then another very important area of innovation is the potential for linkages of data streams. So we hear a lot of discussion about big data. Well, in healthcare, we've been dealing with big data sets for 2 or 3 decades of 50 million, 100 million subjects. And when we do predictive analytics using those databases, the AUCs tend to be about 70%. The predictive analytics are, 30% inaccurate, 70% accurate. What we need is not so much big data, but richer data, deeper data. And that's what we can explore through NEST around building these layers of data that provide much more richer understanding of patient experience and how patients benefit from the devices or don't develop from devices. If we keep using kind of revision rates as a metric of, say, hip replacements, then we're stuck with innovation that only going to improve revision rates instead of really improving the patient experience. So this linkage, I think, of PROs, patient preferences, wearables into the EMRs, and Mercy has been a kind of leader in this area. So what does J&J bring to the table? We have an understanding of our products and what they need to kind of take the next steps for our products, and how real-world evidence studies can support that development and access. And so we have, of course, a multidisciplinary team that collaborates and thinks through these projects together to figure out what are the most important things for our devices and how can real-world evidence be used productively and proactively. Then we have skills in turning real-world data into evidence for regulators and payers. And that we've often learned from other sectors. And I think many studies are not feasible to do within real-world evidence, and to understand that quickly and then not to choose that as a test case helps to come up with something that is practical to do. Then we have a team to conceive and write and obtain internal approval of concept proposals. And another thing that's kind of been useful is the ability to identify the use of the study device by the different network collaborators, so we could figure out which partners would actually be using that device, so that then we could consider who should be involved in doing the study. Of course, if they don't use that device, then you can't do the study with those partners. Our experience so far in terms of learnings has been that the NEST network collaborators are indeed collaborators and easy to work with, are great scientists and skilled researchers. Also, what's been really interesting is how easily the distributed data network studies have fallen into place. And I think I attribute that to the fact that we're really building on the infrastructure that was built with PCORI and PCORNet. And because many of the data, the network collaborators worked with Dr. Florence when she was the PCORNet head, there's a kind of mutual understanding around how this will work, and that's led to great ease in getting data, different network collaborators to work together in a distributed data network study. And as Rachel mentioned earlier, the limitation of electronic databases not having UDI turned out to be less of an issue than we had anticipated. Obviously, I think there's a little bit of heavy lifting that has to happen, but I think natural language processing has helped that, and so it hasn't turned out to be as much of a barrier as we thought it would be. Some of the challenges are that we haven't received FDA feedback on the applicability of the NEST test cases for regulatory decision making, so that's not necessarily a challenge, but it's still an unknown. The patient-reported outcomes that are important for medical device evaluations are not consistently in the databases. So, for example, if we're looking at improvement in function, improvement in pain, things that are important for this to measure the success of the device, those are often not in the databases, and so we have to figure out a way to link those two kind of data sources. And since this was the first round of test cases, it took it's taking about approximately 8 months to get funding decisions finalized. So if a small company was using this as a pivotal study on their pathway to get approval, and they were rushing to do that, they would have to take into account this delay. But I think, well, not this delay, but this time to really work through the process. I think once this is an established process, this will speed up. Thank you.
Thank you. So we heard Dr. Shuren say this morning that there is an anticipation that a little over a year from now, we hope to have NEST 1.0 up and running. And while a great deal has happened, a lot of great work has been done in the past couple of years. Obviously, there's a lot more to do between now and that point to get to where we need to be. And Joe, I was struck by your comment that I think you said sometimes you just have to dive in and do stuff. And so I'm hoping, with each of the hats that you wear, and Lesley, both hats that you wear, can you give us a little bit more granularity about what your expectation is about what your experience might be in supporting these test cases, your institution's experience? What's it going to look like? Like on the ground, what are you going to be doing over the next few months as we start exploring these test cases? Or if you don't know, what are you hoping will happen from that?
Okay, I'll go with it. So, there's a famous St. Louisan who once said, predictions are hard to make, especially about the future. And so, it's saying a year from now, where will we be? As I'm looking at there are multiple work streams going on right now at our institution, that I kind of outlined in my remarks. But they're all kind of coming together. They're all congruent in terms of looking at electronic health record data, contextualizing it, and seeing if it's ready for prime time and in device evaluation and for other purposes. And we're looking to see if we can actually find the data in our electronic health record that a device company might want. And I think we're going to get there right now with all we've got going. A year from now, I think we'll have a pretty good handle on that, and I think maybe we'll be ready for maybe an initial go at looking at a device for some sort of regulatory decision making, maybe post-market sort of expansion of indication, something along those lines. I think we should be ready to go, and by we, I would think it would be more than one, health system like Mercy. I think it would be, well, the network collaborators, the Mayo, Yale, kind of Mercy sort of collaboration. I think we should probably be there by this time next year. Don't hold my feet to the fire on that, but that's my gut.
So Lesley, how do you see the data quality subcommittee supporting the test cases?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one way that the subcommittee supports the test cases is by being practical and realistic about how we assess and how we encourage them to assess their own data quality going forward. So what would not be helpful for NEST would be for us to set a bar for data quality that nobody can achieve within the time frame we have, which is why I really underscored this framework and a real progression toward increasing data quality. I mean, Joe just mentioned it, and I mentioned it as well, that for many of us, part of the work to do is to make sure that the data that are needed are captured and are captured in a reliable way. So marrying that process of identifying where those sources are and making sure that they're captured in a reliable way with some objective way of assessing data quality, I think that really helps to move this forward. I did want to pick up, just with my Duke hat on, something that Joe said, which is really critical and answers, Owen, your question about, like, what does this test case look like within an institution? What is the real work? And, the initial work before we proposed a way to address the test case was to really dig into the institution and find out where those data are collected, make sure that we have within the institution internal collaborators who understand the data stream, where those data come from, what clinical groups are involved, because at least in our institution, and I suspect it's the same at Mercy, you don't get very far if all you have is a picture of a database structure, and that tells you really almost nothing. So building that team within the institution so that now that the test case moves forward, we have the ability to then go back and not only verify and begin to harvest those data, but also to record how we do that and what challenges we run into, so that, again, the next time we do it, it's easier and we build on what we've learned.
Yeah, this point is absolutely critical, and it is actually the difference between what we're doing, what you're doing, what we're doing, and what's been done in the past with data dumps, where a company asks someone, a health system, for a tranche of data on maybe patients with hypertension, and then you get a little analyst sit down and make a little program real quick and pull out some data and dump it. That's not what we're talking about here. This is really data curation. It requires the people who are actually collecting the data to be part of it. Some really intelligent data scientists who worked in electronic health record data before to be able to curate the data and put it in a form that we can actually use it and rely on it. So this is a lot of work. It's not just a data dump.
And Paul, from your perspective, what do you expect the industry sponsor experience to be working on a test case?
Well, it's going to be doing studies, which is a lot of fun. I love doing it. I think one of the issues in doing studies is there's always a lot of decisions you have to make. There's always a lot of assumptions, probably 10 or 15 assumptions. And so you have to work through those assumptions and understand them, that they're realistic, that they're really capturing what's accurate, and that where those assumptions make a big difference, that you're doing sensitivity analyses that make clear how that influences the results. So those are the things that take a lot of time in doing studies in real-world evidence databases. And particularly if we start to link different data streams and get more complex data sources, and we have to make sure that we're understanding the data correctly and understanding how the methodology that we're using may create certain types of inference that, and biases. So I think there'll be a lot of work in terms of really understanding the data, understanding the conclusions that we're coming to from the results.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. If I may make a comment. I should have mentioned before one of the real values I see in the collaboration with industry, in particular here. You know, we academics love to answer a good question. We think up all sorts of good questions all the time. What's especially exciting here is that we're identifying with industry partners. They're identifying important questions that they need answers to, and we're having an opportunity to partner and answer those. So that adds some, I think, both immediacy and excitement to the work that we're doing. So just wanted to make sure I got that point in.
So following that line of thinking, Paul, maybe you can give us a little bit of insight as to the decision that a company like Johnson & Johnson might consider in terms of going it alone and gathering real-world evidence and forming your own partnerships to gather that data versus the potential of the NEST Coordinating Center supporting those partnerships?
Well, one of the devices that we're studying, hope to study if it gets approved, is not used that much. So we had to go to a number of different in order to get the sample size to do a reasonable study, we had to go to more than one health partner. The work for us to go to each of those data partners and build a relationship of trust and would have been huge. And it happened, perhaps not like that, but almost like that, through the NEST Coordinating Center, because there was a trusted broker where everyone knew that this would be good research, and that there would be quality on all sides. So facilitating that process is a huge advantage to us. And then I think the credibility, often I think as industry researchers, particularly when it comes to real-world evidence, there's a lot of question about the credibility of the results. And so by working with a trusted institution that's going to make sure there's good quality, that there's the data quality assurance, there's the methodology. It'll go through a methodology panel, so there'll be a methodology assurance, and at a certain level of transparency creates more credibility for the research that I think is very helpful. So those are just two ways. There are many other ways in which it really makes it so much easier for us to do studies that are important for the company and hopefully for patients.
So the concept of a trusted broker and, you know, sort of a reliable set of a reliable quality source is something that I think the Data Quality Subcommittee is going to be working on. And maybe Lesley, can you talk a little bit about how that might work? Like, how is the output from the Quality Subcommittee going to be used by a potential data source to say we're a quality source?
Yeah, it's a great question. And without getting into maybe into too much detail, I'll talk a little bit about approaches that we've certainly used in PCORNet and that are used in other networks as well, where we establish some very clear benchmarks about the kinds of curation or data checking activities that are important to make sure that the data make sort of logical sense, and really laying those out, being clear about that so that partners have, both the network collaborators have a way of demonstrating that the data sources that they're using meet that level of quality, and for our industry partners and for the FDA, they understand that there's a fairly clear benchmark. So really we're talking about fairly objective criteria, not a sort of a loose description of how we address quality and then that gets a stamp of approval, but really I'm digging a little bit deeper than that. Does that help?
Yeah, that does. Thank you. So I'm getting the 2-minute warning. I'd like to invite the audience to ask a couple of questions. Looks like we have one in the back.
Ted Listick from Medtronic. Really enjoyed the presentations. One of the things that we would think about NEST being valuable for in the future, not something that needs to be done right away, is the applicability to international issues. So NEST, for example, helping to coordinate within registries that already exist internationally, the International Consortium of Orthopedic Registries. So to what extent are there plans coming up to incorporate that information, not just generated within the US, but generated from other areas? And secondarily, the extent to which there have been conversations around how data generated from NEST could be useful for regulatory authorities outside the US, right? So both how the information here extends elsewhere and how information elsewhere can be pulled into here. Again, this isn't the sort of thing that I would anticipate is top of mind, but as we think about how NEST will go in the future, I think those are two very interesting items for which I'd like to hear the panel give feedback.
Anyone like to take that one?
You want to go? So I think this is a great question, and we could go on for 2 minutes. My goodness. So there's a lot of time, there's a lot of opportunity to work internationally, and we're actually kind of in the midst of that. I'm personally on at least one international effort in implementing UDI and using it for what we're talking about here, integrating with clinical data. I think that's actually one of the strengths of UDI. If we can get that the same worldwide, internationally, it will help us in doing this research, and being able to do it in a much broader, with much broader populations in multiple countries, and the regulators can figure out how they want to use the data once it's generated that way. I don't speak for them, but I think there's a huge opportunity.
So.
I would just add that there's no reason, there are good data sets outside of the US, and there's no reason why those data couldn't become network collaborators as part of NEST. I think it's just a question of the stakeholders making that decision. There's definitely, as I think Michelle McMurray-Heath said earlier, from the companies, we all are working globally, and so we're very interested in having NEST extend beyond the US.
So we are out of time, so please join me in thanking our panel.